Hello, this is part two of episode 30 of Uncommon Conversations with Jason Call, who's a candidate running out of Washington. And we were just talking about climate change and how we solve it, and make it so that the entire world is united with us in how we solve climate change. And there we go. All right. You'll have to request again, I think. I'll try to invite you. Done. Cool. All right. So I was on a long rant about how we solve climate change and the final, or the CO2 portion of climate change and the final. Let me adjust this. That's not cool. I don't like that. Okay. The final piece of it is, how do we create this incentive? The way we do that is a capital gains tax exemption for all investments made into the 3D farming industry and held for 10 or more years. This creates the long-term investment incentive, and the entire capital pool across the entire world will be available to come in and participate and invest in this. And it will be, and again, as the technology evolves and 3D farming becomes the more efficient way to do farming in general, especially when it's a big city or local farming instead of it being some farm and it's shipped out to you, we'll have this market shift in agriculture, and then we'll have this, we can actively plant trees and create this, but nature will do it for us in large part. And an increase in human CO2 emissions of 100%, you just flatten us out. 40 billion tons a year, just get rid of it all. It would take 10 years to bring the excess CO2 out of the atmosphere. And obviously the economic costs of a move like that would be just crazy. But if we increase natural absorption by 5%, we have the exact same effect in 10 years. So it doesn't take a huge shift in this agricultural footprint to really, I think it's 11% would equate to that 5% of total CO2 emissions, 11% reduction in our agricultural footprint. So, yeah, so I think that's how we solve it.
I think that's a great idea. It has been noted. I think it was, I want to say the anthropologist Margaret Mead who had said that her famous quote is about never doubt that the small group of people can change the world. It's the only thing that ever has. But she also said we need to find a way to make peace more profitable than war. That, and you're essentially talking the same thing, right? So how do we make, if we are stuck, if we're not going to have quote unquote the socialist revolution and have the government really mandating these things, then how do we make sure that those needs of the people and needs of the planet are met? And if we have to do it within this capitalist system, we absolutely do have to make those needs more profitable than the old destructive habits. So it's good. It's good thinking.
On that line of thinking, dude, thank you so much for asking that question, dude. This just popped into my head, and I think this could work. If the demand for what they're producing decreases, we have some sort of a bonus offer so that they're not going to lose out on the money quite as much. And this is really where it's going to work. During wartime, create a limit on their profit, because they're not going to be like, okay, now we're not going to make all this money because we're making slightly less while we're having to produce this stuff. If you just say, you're going to get, in peacetime, you'll be taken care of, and in wartime, you're not going to make as much money. I mean, that shifts the dynamic 100%, I think. I don't know.
Well, I mean, there shouldn't be any war profiteering, period. And I think in times of legitimate war, like, let's go back. And when I say legitimate war, I'm going all the way back to World War II, where there was
that was the last actual existential threat to the United States.
And not just the United States, but really worldwide. I am the kind of person that doesn't look at the American citizen as being any more or less inherently valuable than any other citizen of the world. So I look at not just the threat to America, but a threat to people all over the world, which, you know, fascism absolutely is.
Mhm.
And so in World War II, and I don't have the specifics around it, that the companies that were producing our military hardware, whatever it might have been, they were not allowed to profit. Like they, you know, people would be paid for their labor, but the company itself was not making huge amounts of profit. There's probably like, you know, reinvestment in research and development and that kind of stuff. But, you know, you weren't having CEOs of weapons companies, you know, making, you know, whatever the 1940 equivalent of billions of dollars would be. And I think, and also in that time, that was the last wartime effort where the American people actually felt, you know, this national sense of we're at war and we all need to pull together. Like, and there was rationing on this and that and the other, and that, you know, it was all done for the war effort because we were fighting the Nazis. The people who were impacted by the Vietnam War were the people who got drafted and their families. And the rest of the nation may have had an opinion one way or the other, but they weren't really being impacted in the same way that the entire society was in World War II. And I think that really goes to show, you know, when war is justified and when war is not justified. You know, if war is justified, then yes, absolutely, we should all be pulling together and we should all be sacrificing, not just the people who are sent overseas to do the fighting. You know, war right now is just big business for the weapons manufacturers and the fossil fuel companies. And I think you know, like we have discussed a couple of times already, you know, it exists for its own purpose rather than, you know, any actual real benefit to society at large.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So anyway,
So do you think hmm, so would like just hyper regulation, as we go closer to trying to limit the profiteering off of war and war stuff, my fear, I don't know if this is rationally based, but my fear is that if we are not paying for the top of the line military equipment, someone will, and that means we're kind of screwed. Like if we're number two militarily and someone else wants to take us on and they decide to, you know. So I just
if
want to
we
make sure
had,
we maintain that stability. We don't want to
so
risk
this is
losing
where,
that advantage, I think.
so this is where I think there needs to be more of a global cooperative mindset. And you know, can we get to a point in our global society where we are essentially eliminating war? What is the purpose of war? The purpose of war has pretty much always been to acquire resources for ourselves that other people have and that we want, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So is that because our needs aren't being met that we feel we need to take somebody else's? I mean, I've you know, if you look at the history of, you know, I want to say like post Enlightenment Europe, you know, where the borders are constantly changing and people can't leave well enough alone, and they're always trying to go and acquire this, that, and the other, and you end up with a bunch of there was a bunch of little countries who were constantly battling the other little countries, and it was never good for the, you know, the average populace, right? You know, they're always just this idea that we're in a constant state of war. But what is the purpose of it? That we're trying to acquire something that somebody else has. So I want to say, and this is maybe a dangerous thing for me to say, we need to get beyond this nation state mentality and recognize that we are a global community that is in one way or another reliant on each other And we should be as concerned about the citizens in China having their needs met as we are about our citizens having our needs met. And if we could have that sort of more global mentality about things, I truly believe that we can eliminate the need for war completely. I think that's sort of an elevated step of humanity, is that we get to a point where we all recognize that we're citizens of this planet, and war in the end does nobody any good.
Yeah.
War
I
is
think if
it's
we can all
always
just acknowledge that us killing each other is totally useless at this point, and you could say, I think you could definitely say it was pretty much always useless, and we just need to slowly try to get to that realization. The only pushback I have is twofold. One, when you do support the constituents of a country through taxation, you're indirectly supporting the government. And so, if a government is doing immoral things or is an existential threat to us, enriching that country is enriching the government and then potentially threatening us. So, like, I like a carrot and stick game where if the government is moving towards more humanitarian behaviors and moving towards what we want in terms of, religious tolerance and ethnic tolerance and various things, then we'll say you can be a part of the big economic game internationally. And then if you
yeah.
don't, tariffs, sanctions, individual, if it's war crimes or just immoral activities, what's happening with the Uyghur Muslims in China, things like that need to come with an economic cost, so they just won't do it, because I believe the Chinese government cares more about enriching their people to keep the people happy to maintain their power than they do any like individual oppressive action. The only thing that really I think would keep us in any substantive way from world peace is Taiwan. If China can say Taiwan is sovereign, that problem is done and we can leave it be. If China
There are
refuses to say it's sovereign, then we will continuously be in this state of threat, because at the end of the day, like, to me, if you're not actively in war and once the borders have been separated, that the international community needs to say enough. We cannot just say, well, you disagree with this, sense of what your appropriate territory was, 300 years ago, 100 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever. And I even apply that to the United States with the Native American situation and like how we treat them. First off, we don't treat them like citizens, and we don't treat them like a sovereign people. We treat them like a weird in between where they don't have rights, but they're under our thumb. It's a weird deal. But like, there is no solution to say, well, we're gonna now just collapse the United States, get rid of our government, all the white people will move out, and we're gonna create this there's an acknowledgement of the horrors, and then there's no workable solution. So you can't. So it's like it's worth acknowledging, but then there's this implicit like this is stolen land, and there needs to be some reconciliation of that. And unless you're going to give them the land back, and I think we saw this in Oklahoma, so we're going to see how this actually plays out.
there is a land back movement, and to tell you the truth, I support it. I think if our, again, what are our national priorities? And I think peace and economic stability, in that people's human needs are being sufficiently met. I think those have to be our national priorities, and for the indigenous peoples of this land, if we are to support self-determination for them, I think land back to those communities has got to be part of the solution. And I say that in the same way that I say that reparations to the descendants of African slaves has got to be part of the solution. Direct cash reparations, because of the long-term and short-term impacts of 400 years of slavery on this continent. And I think that does, I don't know what I think there's no like dollar value that actually makes up for the impact of their communities, but I think that there is a dollar value that says, okay, we are doing what we can to make retribution, to make amends, and to bring the African American community into balance. When we talk about balance, and things being out of balance. It's, you know, our economic system is extremely out of balance for the African American community, and I don't think anybody can deny that. And if putting cash
Well, it's
into the
literally
correct act,
statistically true. They're poorer on
of course,
average than the other
yeah,
communities, so it's not even up for debate.
yeah. So putting cash into that community is the way that we in some way make up for the horrors of slavery. Then I'm all for it. I think we can
You
do that, and I think we should do that.
you're going to love my thoughts on reparations in a second, but I want to take one step back to the land thing. So,
Sure.
there's two different issues. There's treaties that we made with them that we broke, and then
Mm-hmm.
there's the land that we purchased from other colonial powers like the French and the Dutch, I believe, that,
Yeah.
and then the Spanish, that means we're not directly liable as colonizers, but the general European colonization part of history and recent history played a part in that. And so treaties that we broke with existing native peoples and like forcing them to move and stuff like that, those kinds of things I see as like an appropriate grounds to talk about land return. But if it
Mm-hmm.
was another empire conquered these people and we bought that land after that, we don't have a direct moral responsibility to what happened, but we do have a moral responsibility, like I said, to not treat them as uh, either they are equal to us and have the same rights and deserve the same support as we do as American citizens, or they're sovereign people who should be in charge of their own affairs. And then you have the question of if there are sovereign people in charge of their own affairs, how does border disputes and the airspace and stuff like that work?
A lot of
Because obviously we can't have
there's a
people
lot of stuff to
flying.
talk about for sure.
We can't have
Yeah.
Chinese spies flying into a native tribe to then come into the United States. We have to have that as a
Sure.
geographical
Sure.
question. So
There
what
would
version of that land return do you support or do you think is worthwhile?
there would be some common sense. I think you're talking about some common sense conditions on, you know, all right, so if you're putting conditions on sovereignty, it's not really sovereignty, but also like, we have natural political relationships, and if those political relationships are violated, then there would be consequences. So I mean, that's really getting into some minutia of how this would work.
The
So
sovereignty. So like a good delineation would be like the sovereignty is if native peoples have grown hemp since we made it illegal on their land and had the federal government come in and bulldoze over it. That is a violation of their sovereignty as a people. But yeah, having some sort of a pact and a security agreement to say all of our
yeah,
airspace and everything is still our choice, and you have your own airport, but you abide by our rules. Like yeah, that
I
seems
think
like a good.
I think you would have to. And speaking of hemp, we should be growing hemp. We
Yeah, no,
absolutely
dude,
should be
that's
growing
like
hemp.
as time goes on, there's almost nothing like so like how do we solve plastic waste? Biodegradable plastic. Do we already
Yep.
have biodegradable plastic? Yes, we do. How do we make it? Oh, guess what? Hemp. How do you
Yep.
have sustainable clothes that you don't have to buy new ones every single year? Oh, you can make clothes out of hemp. How do you have good industrial rope? Oh, great. How do you have cheap, green housing of the future? Oh, hemp.
It's
it's
true.
it,
It's
it's
true.
getting crazy where it's like,
There's
why
a
have we
real
not solved this yet?
it's not a conspiracy theory to say that there are some very real economic reasons that hemp has been kept illegal. And I've been a hemp and cannabis activist pretty much my entire life. So I was very proud that Washington State became the first state in the nation, along with Colorado, to legalize cannabis for recreational purposes, and I was a part of that effort. So
That's cool.
yeah. But hemp is it's really a no-brainer. And it is kind of stunning. You see that the political forces are arrayed against it. But again, that's all big money in the system. Wanting to keep their power and their income, rather than looking at what are our priorities and how do we
And
effectively solve climate crisis and other issues.
And just to bring the point home for any right wingers that are going to be that you'll come across or that are talking about this, the government telling you you cannot be a capitalist in a particular industry should like self-evidently show them that this is nonsense. Like they're literally,
Well, there's a lot of right wingers
it's
that are
just
actually
crazy.
supportive. They're supportive of growing hemp. I mean, honestly, Rand Paul's a loon, but he supports hemp farming. So it's not just the lefty thing, and it doesn't have anything to do with people smoking dope.
Yeah, yeah.
It's purely an industrial endeavor.
And the younger generation, especially in places, I'm in California.
Uh,
Real quick, Bernie Sanders came and did a rally in Stockton, California when I was living here before, and I took my one of my younger brothers to it. It was really, really fun. That was just a random side note. But in
sure.
growing up in California now, and all the areas where it's been legalized, even the Republicans are realizing that it's not the end of the world. It's a great substitute for alcohol for many people. It makes everyone more sensitive and like compassionate and
Well,
nice. You
you
know,
knew the politics of it were bullshit as soon as John Boehner, former Republican Speaker of the House, when he was out of the House, he is now a lobbyist for the cannabis industry because he knows there's bags of money to be made in it. So
yeah.
it is one of the most despicable and truly racist. I mean, there is a very
Reefer
clear
Madness was
case.
literally racism used to make it illegal.
Yep,
I mean, like
yep,
directly. There's no question.
abs-
There's no separating it with
absolutely,
this one.
absolutely. And so tied to the private profit prison industry, tied to slave labor in the government prison facilities, and just the general oppression of black and brown peoples in this country, and poor people, right? White working class and poor people who can't. So I'll tell the story, and I don't mind telling it. I was the only thing I've ever been arrested for is weed possession, and in 1996 I got busted with less than 2 grams, right? Less than 2 grams of weed and a little pipe. And because I was a white 25-year-old, college. I think I was my senior year of college. Would have been senior year of college. What year was this? No, I guess I was out of college, but I was a college grad, no priors, no parking violations, and it was literally, do we want to ruin this good white kid's life? I was able to pay $500, have a lawyer go down, argue with the judge. Yeah, the way the cop found the weed was complete crap, and the judge said, yeah, well, that was a little bit invasive, violation of Fourth Amendment, and all of that. And they tossed it out. I got 6 months probation. I had to do a week of drug and alcohol counseling, which was just that in itself was a
That sounds
scam
like so
because
much work, man. Even
because
that sounds like so much work for weed.
I know.
Uh,
It was 3 hours a day, and at the end of my 5 days that I was there, they sat me down. They were like, "Well, we would like to offer you these continued services." And I said, "I don't need your continued services. I don't have a problem with weed. I
you
smoke
have the
weed.
problem with weed.
I smoke weed, and I have since I was 14 years old, and it's not a problem because obviously I graduated from college and I have a job, and the way they tried it was just like profit extraction for the system, and I dismissed it out of hand. But my point being, white kid, $500, boom. I got no record. I literally can say, I have no criminal record, even though I've been arrested, right? The record doesn't exist. Now, how many people, can say that who aren't in a position where I could just basically buy my way out of it with $500? So it's a joke of a system, and we just
Yeah.
need to legalize it for everybody. Definitely one of the things that if I'm elected, I'm going to be jumping right on top of and pushing is federal legalization of cannabis. It's just nuts. It's nuts what's going on in this country with
Word.
that.
Yeah, that it never should have been made illegal in the first place. Like It was, and so yeah, each year that goes by and we're still dealing with this and there's still people getting arrested or even fined. Like, the government's stealing your money. They're being thieves when they take
Yep.
your money in the form of a fine. That's $500 of your life that you worked for to earn and traded in labor. And then they're just like, haha. So
Yeah. Well, the
my
government didn't
philosophy is
take it.
if whatever
The
you
lawyer
did
took it.
isn't as bad
I
as
kept the
theft.
lawyer in business. I
Yeah.
kept the lawyer in business. I actually did not have to pay a fine to the courts. I only paid my
Mm.
$500 to the lawyer, and
Oh, okay.
the courts essentially said, all right, 3 months, 6 months probation. I had to private pay for the drug and alcohol counseling thing, and that was another couple $100. But yeah. So it's money sucked out of my pocket. Didn't go to the government. Went to private folks, and then done. I got no record, and the number of lives that have been ruined in this country, not just the individuals who get busted, but families, and all of the ripple effect from that is it's economic devastation for many people.
So it's because I'm a moderate. I try to be a moderate. Try to really do my best to exist in a fair space between the two main sides. Like you said, we have a two-party system. There's more or less two bigger tribes. Libertarians say they're different, but in reality, there's left-leaning libertarians and there's right-leaning libertarians on immigration and abortion, and that is like the big line. And so there really is just the two tribes, and I try to be even with the two. And what I realized is like, um, out of compassion and out of concern and out of an analysis of American history, there is this obvious concern with the way minorities and the Black community have been oppressed. The solutions, especially because the laws right now don't say anything about race. It's not like, well, and now you can abuse Black people as a cop, but Mexicans and white people you got to be cool with, and Asians you never arrest. Like there's no that there's anything on there. So the solutions will have to be something that isn't inherently racial in nature. It's qualified immunity. It's the drug war. It's all these various other things. Um, and so and I mean this from a place of recognizing that it's from a place of compassion. There's a preoccupation with the racial history and the racial dynamics of America on the left, and on the right, there's basically 50% of the time they're defending themselves against accusations of racism. 40% of the time they're just pushing back because they're an individualist and don't like the preoccupation with race and want to talk about it without racial terms. Especially if you're a white guy, you want to avoid feeling like you're being demonized or attacked, because especially like me, I was born in 94. I'm not responsible for anything. And I started voting in 2012, could vote in 2012 and did. What am I responsible for? What am I actually as an individual responsible for? So there's a,
Well,
so
I
they
mean,
come from that side, and so I don't, like I said, the solutions kind of meet in the middle, and they're not. So what are your thoughts on that being a gap between the two sides, and how we might be able to reconcile that in some way? And I want to say, so I said 50%, 40%, 10% of the time they're being racist. So like that is a thing. I'm not going to pretend like that's not a thing on the right. Outright direct racism is a right-wing phenomenon. Some subtle forms of you think Black people can't make it on their own does exist on the left, and it's just out of a place of like that mother bear energy, that compassion. We got to take care of people, and if you've been held down, it makes sense that like you would need help up. But there's a maternalistic, you can't get it on your own, and like the paternalistic thing, well, actually, there's a bad version of paternalism. So I'll just say the other way of doing it is in personal empowerment, the individual empowerment side of it, where like, yeah, you can't control these broader forces of society, but you could go put in that job application. You could go move to that better part of town. You could try to get your kids out of that crappy school. Like there's some things that no one can ever do
yeah,
for
I
you
mean,
that we
I
have to
want
make
to
sure we're trying to
when you
encourage and remind people to do.
when you're
And
talking
not in
when you're
a,
talking about systemic poverty, there are some things that are easier said than done. And I think the important thing for white people, like you said, I was born in 1994. None of this is my fault. So again, you know, we're living in a society where we have some amount of responsibility to one another, right? You know, there are things that I can do that are personal freedom, but when that starts, you know, really, when that, like, my freedom to swing my fist ends where your nose starts, right? You know, that's,
Hmm.
you know,
Hmm.
so I think when we are talking about things that are systemically racist, and there is, you know, systemic and institutional racism in our system, I think as white people who are part of the, especially white males, who are part of the dominant paradigm, and I have a Republican. I grew up in a Reagan Republican household. I have a Republican father who pushes back on this all the time. He's 81 years old, you know, and he's very much everything I had, I earned myself. And I say, you know what? I know you did the work. I know that, you know, you quote unquote earned what you had, but you had a lot of help along the way because you were white. That if you were black, you would have not had that help, and that the forces would have been arrayed against you. Um, and I think, you know, I don't think that that is an arguable point, but that's what where white people like my dad want to push back, is they're like, I did all of this myself, and I'm like, no, you didn't. You're part of a greater society, and you had advantages because you were a white male in this country. So I think it is incumbent upon all white people to, one, recognize their white privilege. I mean, that's really what it is, and I say this all the time, is, you know, I just referenced my drug arrest, right? Had I been black, that could have been the start of a downward spiral for 2 grams of weed that would have kept me out of a job, out of housing, you know, and affected my entire life, right? Because I'm white, and I do say because I'm white. Now, I was compliant with the cop. I mean, I wasn't a dick to the cop when he was arresting me. I was like, you know, I was rolling my eyes like, Jesus, this is ridiculous. But yeah, I'll sign the paper. I have this, and then I went and got a lawyer. Things could have gone very, very different if I had not had access to $500 and if I'd had a different skin color. And I think those are
Or
the
if you had
things.
made yourself a threat to the cop, if you had
Sure,
acted in a way that would have spooked the cop, that,
but
and I'm not saying like that justifies any action. I'm just saying like when I watched the Jacob Blake video where the cop was following him around one side of the car, around the front, and then back to the door, and then he reached into the thing, like I would be terrified of whatever that dude's trying to go get when he's not willing to just stand there and talk to me, and he's like that. That's not. I mean, like that. Like
so
you can say,
we're
even if that cop's
but we're
racist, you could say that's a justifiable type of
but
thing.
I mean, I am talking about a general institutional and
General.
systemic racism that is, you know, not this incident where maybe I was threatening to somebody, but just generally, how was I not impacted and could just go ahead and get on with my life in ways that other people would have, it would have been just a downward trajectory of being oppressed by, you know, and like I said, I got a thing on my record. Now I can't get a job. Now I can't, you know, like my whole life is potentially limited in a way, that I was simply able to buy myself out of. And I think we have to recognize those things. I think we have to recognize studies that say, you know, you could have two equally qualified applicants for a job, and if you have a name that sounds like it's an African American name, that application is far less likely to be the one that is selected than the one that is, you know, Nancy Drew or whatever it might be. Those things are very real, and we have to combat them. Those are the systemic things that you talked about, being able to get up and move. Like, we know real estate agents will literally not show houses in certain areas to black families, right? And you know, so there's a there isn't anything. I mean, the recognition that that is what happens, um, is really the first step. Now, what you as an individual choose to do and how you choose to get involved and how you choose to respond to that, but the recognition that we live in an inherently racist society, I think is really important for white people. If you start recognizing that, I think it's less easy to say, oh, just there, here's a quick solution that you should do if you're a black person and life's rough for you, you do this, that, and the other. It's just not that easy. And I think that there needs to be a recognition that there are things that are easier said than done. I think as white people, if we can recognize those things, I think we'll be more inclined to work harder to make sure the system is more fair. And I don't look at that as a mama bear attitude. I mean, I look at that as just a plain reality of how our society operates.
Well, the mama bear attitude is the idea that so I believe simultaneously that you have certain things within your control as an individual, choices you can make, and some amount of effort you're going to choose to put in, and that has to do with your sense of hope and belief and personal identity and all sorts of things. And then you have the system that's working for or against you, and to what degree. And so if you want to say, so here's the thing, like, I did not cause the mess for the black
No.
community. I am not in allegiance with that paradigm you referenced. I am against that paradigm you referenced. And so I recognize the responsibility to help our fellow man and clean up the mess. But the only thing is and maybe sometimes I think these things maybe are too, like, we're stuck on a boneheaded point. Like, I don't think you think I'm personally responsible for any of this system
No.
emerging the way it did. And I don't think most people on the left really think that. It's just an interpretation of the phrase. And white privilege, I want to just talk about that real quick. So first off, the idea that in a white majority society especially, that there are lots of people out there that have treated black people differently than they would treat me because they're black and I'm white. That is true. Like, those people are out there. That racist problem is real and it has a societal impact. But the privileges and the challenges of life definitely go beyond just the racial dynamic. And for me, and I know you agree with that, and for me, like, where it hits home is I was in a position where me and my younger brothers and my mom and my dad had no food in the home, and our refrigerator and our TV were connected by an extension cord to the neighbors next door. I have been arrested myself for driving while under the influence of marijuana, which you have to to me, you have to have you have to scientifically, like, prove that you think it intoxicates you in that kind of a way, because I mean, not to bury myself, but I have driven while high a lot, and I'm still, so it takes 6 hours to get out of your bloodstream. I'm currently under the influence of marijuana and doing this podcast. So if people want to say I'm inept or intoxicated, bring it.
I'm right there with you. No more clarification necessary. I know exactly what you're saying.
So anyway, so my only thing is, our humanity unites us more than our races differentiate us. And this is more of an emotional argument, I think, because I grew up on the right. I sort of had that, like, allegiance to the right for a period of my political upbringing since adulthood, is the idea that, like, my life is not easy because I'm white, and your life is not hard because you're black. Overall.
So, well, I'm going to disagree with you on that point, but I will say, to recognize white privilege is not to say that white people don't have a lot of problems. Poverty exists in the white community. All sorts of struggles exist for white. That is not the case. But the added difficulty of systemic and institutional racism is something that white people don't have to deal with. And that is really the first step to healing, and bringing things back into balance for races, is simply for white people to recognize that there are challenges that exist for non-white people in this country that do not exist for white people. It doesn't eliminate the fact that white people work hard to, quote unquote, get what they have. It doesn't eliminate the fact that white people have all sorts of struggles that also exist within every other community. But that factor of race is an added on top of, what you would have to deal with in, like, take the straight up economics of white people being poor and black people being poor. Is it easier for a white person to get out of poverty than it is for a black person to get out of poverty? By and large, yes, it is. So that is really what we're saying. There is an inherent privilege in how you are treated in this country, being a white person, versus how you are treated in this country systemically and institutionally, being a black person. And that, I just think if everybody came to that recognition and just sort of thought about that and thought about, okay, what could I do in my daily life? And maybe there's nothing you can do. Maybe you're not in a position to do anything. But if you are in a position to do something and have that recognition and have that impact the way you operate out in the world, it's a better thing than not having that recognition. I think that's really, what we're getting down to.
No, I see that. I think so here's the thing. I more or less just I'm never about semantics or the specific words you use, but there is something that I think, like, on some sense there's white privilege, and then the other inferred side of that is black challenges. And I think that the idea on the right that there aren't racist people out there treating black people differently and creating a problem in their life, and it has this broader, resultant effect, like from the individual racist perspective, you can recognize that. I think that the words and sort of the ritual, not to be derogatory, but the ritual of, I am acknowledging my white privilege, I am confessing my sins at Catholic Church, I am, like, the specific way of saying it, versus just because I think lots of people will recognize that truth, and then they say, what are the solutions? And then there's this sort of blending of a recognition that racism contributes to the problem, and the issue of racism not being able to be a part of a solution. If you're truly anti-racist or just trying to be non-racist, you can't be racial in your solutions to that kind of a thing. You're just creating a new paradigm of racial caste systems or something to that effect.
I'm not sure.
That's a weird problem.
I understand what you're saying. I'm not sure I agree with it. But it's 1:55 right now, and I've got a phone call at 2:00. So
okay.
I would love to catch up with you in the future on these ideas. But yeah, I've got to go right now, but it's been a pleasure to talk to you. I don't know if you have a wrap up that you need to do, because we didn't talk about when we were going to end, but I do have a call here in a few minutes.
No, you're good. You're good. Yeah. I just go until there's a limit on when we go, or there's a natural lull in the conversation. So this is a good time to pull it off as any time would be. Thank you so much for coming on, man. I know you're busy. You're trying to make things happen, so I appreciate your time. This conversation lived up to and exceeded my expectations, and I had pretty good expectations for this. So this has been dope.
Thank you.
And and I hope I really provided value to you with some of these things. I think that climate change idea probably is the juicy part you'll be walking away with. And man, this has been great. We'll definitely do it again. I'm going to take a break after my 50th podcast. This is the 30th one. So we'll have some time to do this again before the end. And then that'll be season 1 for me. And then I'll take some time off and try to just promote the podcast I've done instead of doing more podcasts. Because
I hear you.
50's plenty in 3 months.
All right. Appreciate it very much, Jordan. I wish you a good rest of your Sunday, and you can DM me anytime. We're connected on Instagram. I did follow you back now, so that maybe it'll be easier to connect in the future. But just keep in touch.
Sounds good, man. You have a good one.
All right. You too. Bye.
Bye.